Greetings. Welcome to Cyber Focus, your source for international business information. I'm your host, Ryan Craven, and our guest today is Professor Ken Dau-Schmidt. Professor Dau-Schmidt is a nationally recognized teacher and scholar in labor and employment law and in the economic analysis of legal problems. His innovative teaching methods using classroom simulations have been widely featured in publications and have earned him the Leon H. Wallace Award, Indiana Law's Top Teaching Prize, and IU's Sylvia Bowman Award for Teaching Excellence. He's author of several books and numerous articles on labor and employment law and the economic analysis of law, and he frequently presents papers at academic conferences and law schools across the US, Canada, Europe, and Asia. He is also heavily involved in several national academic associations. He was elected to the National Council of the American Association of University Professors. In addition, he has served in various capacities in the Executive Committee of the Association of American Law School and the Industrial Relations Research Association's section, both on labor and employment law. He is also a founder of the Midwest Law and Economics Association. Professor Dau-Schmidt has been fortunate enough to be invited to teach at various European and Asian universities, including those in Germany, France, and Taiwan. He is also an affiliated faculty member with Peking University's School of Transnational Law in Shenzhen, China. Ken, thanks for being here with us. Well, Ken, again, thanks for spending some time and sharing your expertise and knowledge with us. We'll jump right kind of into some of those questions. You studied and written about employment relationships for over 40 years. Kind of what drew you to that interest, in studying the employment relationship?
Well, I got started way back in college thinking about the employment relationship, and I think what drew it to me, two primary things. One of which is most relevant for today, but one thing is just how fundamentally important the employment relationship is, both to the individual and to the firm, and then also to society, the functioning of a good society and how society is ordered. But also within that importance, what's really fascinating about the employment relationship is that the parties have this kind of divergence between their collective interests in mutual success and their individual interests in succeeding at the expense of the other. And what I mean by that is they have a collective interest between employers and employees in mutual success. Employees want to work for a profitable, growing company, and firms want employees who are happy and productive and feel like they're progressing. And so it seems like they have terrific mutual interests, which of course they do. The problem is that sometimes they can only benefit at the expense of the other. So in other words, to have happy employees, you might have to pay them more, you might have to have a safer workplace, you might have to whatever. Any of these things can affect the bottom line, which of course can make the firm less profitable. So even though they have this collective interest in mutual success, they also have this tension underlying all the time, where their individual interests, they sometimes could not, I mean, there are win-wins. I'm not saying there aren't win-wins, but sometimes you can only win at the expense of the other party, and then that's where things get interesting. In the United States, we've kind of accommodated these different interests through a system of individual contract and then resort to the market. In other words, we have some collective bargaining, we have some regulation over what the minimal terms of employment can be, minimum wage and maximum hour regulations, things like that. But in large part, and we have some unions, although they're much diminished now in our national economy. But for the largest part, the way these interests and diverging and collective interests are accommodated is through individual contract. Employers make an offer to employees of what are the terms that they would get by working there. The employee decides to accept or reject them or to go someplace else. And so the employee's real recourse is, if I don't like your terms, I have to find an alternative job that's got better terms that fit me better. And this kind of resolving this through individual contract, we've also set up a conception of our firms that's referred to in the literature actually as the shareholder value model of firms. And what the idea there is that management is supposed to run firms for the benefit of the shareholders to maximize shareholder value. And we actually give management incentives, usually in stock buyouts and things like that, or purchase plans, that to try to align management interests with shareholders. And so our conception of the firm in trying to accommodate these different interests is that management and shareholders are in a partnership and they enter the market to buy labor. And if labor doesn't like the offer, they go someplace else in the market, but that's what it is. It's management and capital are in a partnership, and labor is kind of this good that we purchase. Now, other countries deal with this differently. The other countries that deal with it, the way they deal with the problem, most developed countries have both more collective bargaining than we do, and they also have more restraints on discharges. And so they have a less tenuous relationship. In the literature, they sometimes talk about America having flexible labor and the rest of the world having inflexible labor. And this can be taken, not all countries are like this, but there are countries that have really even a very different conception of the firm. If you look at Germany and Japan, Germany has this idea of co-determination between management and the employees, both within the workplace and also on the corporate board. For many of the larger corporations, they have worker representatives on the corporate boards. In Japan, they have this idea of the community of shared fate, that the management and employees have the shared fate together. They either rise together or they fall together, and they do this more by norms, less by law. They have a lot of their managers come up out of the ranks, and so they naturally identify with the Japanese workers, and they feel a lot more beholden to the Japanese workers than an American firm would. And so in Germany and Japan, they have this conception of the firm where it's management is in a partnership with employees, and then those two go into the market and purchase capital. And if capital doesn't like the deal you're offering, well, then you have to raise your return to capital or whatever. But capital is the one that's kind of on the outside, and it suffers. If you say in the United States we have flexible labor, and when the market goes bad, we lay off labor. In Europe, they don't have flexible labor, they have flexible capital. And when the market goes bad, capital takes a little bit of a beating. And so who's an insider, who gets to say, who has a voice at least in the running of the firm, and who kind of suffers the ups and downs of the marketplace the most, is different between the United States and Europe. Now, there's advantages and disadvantages to both systems. I mean, this idea of flexible labor, for a while there, that was kind of the envy of the world. You would see articles in Asia and Europe talking about how they had to do things to decrease regulation to make our labor more flexible like the United States and things like that. So there are some advantages to this, and certainly firms like it. They like the idea that if the market goes bad, we lay people off and we cut our losses. And they like the less regulation. There are downsides to it, though. It puts a lot of risk on individual employees. And when you look at, should the firm be bearing risk, or should capital be bearing risk, or should employees be bearing risk? From a larger societal perspective, you'd have to wonder why you have small individual employees bearing so much risk. They would seem to be the worst risk bearer among management, capital, and labor. So it's not clear that that's really a socially optimal arrangement. The other advantage of the flexible labor is when the economy picks up, American firms hire very quickly, because they don't feel a long-term, they know there aren't going to be long-term implications from hiring. They can lay these workers off later if they don't want to. In Europe, they're more hesitant to hire. When the economy takes off, eventually they hire, but they wait and judge and see whether it's going to be a real recovery, because when they hire somebody, it's harder to get rid of them. It's a larger investment in terms of training them and things like that and keeping them around. And so, so that the upside for us is labor is flexible, and management likes that and things like that. And when the economy gets better, we get called back to work. The advantage of the other side is inflexible labor is management feels more of a commitment to employees. They're more likely to invest in them. They're more likely to keep them around. Employees can feel more invested in their firm. Also, when the economy goes down, in Europe, they get layoffs later because there's more barriers to laying employees off. And as a result, it tends to maintain the economy for a while because people keep working and they keep earning and they keep spending. So they they kind of suffer lower troughs than we do. I wouldn't say that's always true, but that's the basic argument there. And it puts less risk on the individual employees, which is the other advantage of kind of inflexible labor.
Does, yeah, it's amazing information. Does, from your perspective, the kind of the flexible labor that we have here in the U.S., it kind of fluctuates and puts that burden on the employee. But when times are good, does that create, do you think, more opportunities for that employee to, is more likely to find better employment or find a firm that is willing to pay him a little bit more for his skills? Is kind of those, our workers tend to be a little bit more flexible for opportunity in the U.S. versus, say, Germany, or the kind of that inflexible market?
Yeah, I'd say that's exactly right. I do think we have a more dynamic labor market. The highs are higher, the lows are lower. More of the risk is on you. If your skills become not marketable anymore, it's kind of on you to you're going to lose your job and you're going to have to get retrained yourself. This is not us. Whereas in Europe, it's not 100%, but in Europe, you're absolutely right. The labor market, I would say, is a little duller. They don't have quite the same highs we do. They don't have quite the same opportunities for moving when the economy is good, although actually they're getting better on labor mobility now. In the old days, North American labor mobility was very much higher than European labor mobility. And now the European Union has changed that a little bit. Their labor mobility has improved. But they don't suffer the same lows that we do. And so there is definitely a trade-off there. And arguably the employer has more incentive. If your skills become less marketable, your employer has incentive to retrain you and change you into something else, or help.
There, you might as well keep them there and make them more productive.
That's right. And you do see more employer training in Europe. I mean, they spend more money on training employees, training and retraining employees than we do.
Well, and I don't know how accurate the trend is, but the U.S., it seems to we're going to spend all this money and time training you, investing in you, but then you have this higher skill set and you're going to jump ship for kind of the next better offer.
Sure. That certainly happens in the American workplace. It's not just that. We sometimes we focus a lot on how employers can take advantage of employees. It's absolutely true that some employees go to an employer, get trained, and then they go out and get a different job. And some employers actually, I know from law firms, I teach in a law school, some law firms don't hire associates. They go around and steal associates from other firms. And their theory is, why should we train them? Let them train them, and then we'll come and steal them away. And so that's and those employers, the employers that suffered with a first, second, or third year associate who's just kind of feeling themselves around the law library, trying to find out what they're doing. They in some ways they've lost out there. That's true.
And it's interesting too, the difference between the flexible and kind of inflexible models. Specifically, the U.S. versus kind of Germany and whatnot. And I wonder how much some of that also, like you said, it models kind of the societal impact. And for the U.S., for example, we're in a recession. We're about to hit. It's continuing and no end in sight. And a lot of that burden is on the taxpayers and the government to help provide, that assistance versus specifically the companies. Yes.
Well, I'm actually going to write a piece on COVID, so I'm looking at this right now, and there's a lot of pieces on COVID internationally. So I'm going to have to look and see how they've dealt with it. We have had, it really is kind of an extraordinary response to COVID, and I think some of it's appropriate. I feel very sorry for the people who've lost their jobs and for the small businessmen that can't run their businesses, and it's through no fault of their own, and it's not because they don't have a viable business plan or anything. It's because right now we can't have them run their business. So it does make sense to maintain those people in the short run, and then once we can reoperate the economy, have them still be functional and still have spending power and things like that, so that the economy doesn't tank. So I think a lot of the response has been appropriate. I've worried a little bit that during an election year, some of the response has been over. It's been too soon, like the extra $600 per week. I could see perhaps, an extra $300 per week or something, but some workers actually are getting paid more now on unemployment comp than they got paid on the job, and I'm not sure why that makes sense. Obviously, a lot of the loans to businesses, I mean, it came out, the program sounded great when they first put it out there, and then you find out, oh, the NBA applied for loans and things like this, and so that there was some waste there. It seems like they did not. I mean, we're definitely in a situation where the government is going to have to stimulate the economy and it's going to have to do deficit spending, but you still don't want to waste it. You don't want to just throw it willy-nilly to the NBA or somebody. But so we'll see what they come up with the second round of the COVID. I know the Democrats have already passed their bill, but the Republicans are working on their bill right now, and then we don't know what will come out of that. But.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of even, kind of going back, to the U.S. model of flexible labor, it seems to me that it's going even a step to be more flexible and less burden on the companies with, the huge advent and, just contract workers, Uber, rideshare, all the deliveries, kind of all of that realm. And I know there's been, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's been some talk of some sort of benefits tracking package that can travel with those folks as they hop from contract to contract, but I don't know how feasible that is. But it seems like
you're absolutely right.
Extremely more flexible.
No, the new information technology and the way people have been able to structure work platforms like Uber, exactly as you did, and they're not the only one. I mean, there's TaskRabbit, there's all these other. Uber is the best known, but it's not the only one that's using this platform, and you're going to see more of this platform in the future. And we've seen, even before the platform, we saw more and more subcontracting. And the question is it is absolutely true that society has made a decision that workers should have certain minimum benefits, like a minimum wage or like unemployment comp and things like that. And that all fits the old employment model pretty well, which is a stable employment model. But now we're into an even less stable employment model, this subcontracting. And you're right that there's a lot of talk in legal terms. It's a difference between the old definition of who was an employee was under the right to direct and control. And now they're talking about what is known as the ABC test, and more states have been adopting what's known as the ABC test. And basically, they say that under the ABC test, they say we presume you're an employee unless the employer can show A, they don't control you, B, you're not economically dependent on them, C, you're in a profession that is historically an independent contractor. You're like the plumber that we bring in to fix the toilet and then you go home at night. We're not having you, drive cars for us every day or whatever else as an independent contractor. You're an actual independent businessman. And more states have been adopting that for their unemployment compensation model. And the argument is we're going to have to adopt that for all of our laws, all of our regulations, so that we'll see. It hasn't been applied in any part of the federal government yet, the ABC test, but there's a good argument that it will be coming.
Well, and I think some of the benefits to that model initially, and I've taken advantage of it too in my time of having a flexible way to earn some extra income, and it's not my primary source of income. But that's certainly not the case for, I think, a lot of those, folks that work in that capacity now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think that's right. Kind
of going all the way back to kind of the stock, employee stock ownership, and kind of help bridge that, instead of having those three sides of employee and managers and, your capital and your shareholders, can an employee stock ownership, solution be, help with some of these problems or help improve?
I think it can, and I think it's an interesting. I think it's an interesting solution. I mean, we talk about these three different players. We got management, capital, and labor, and right now we've got management and capital in a partnership, and labor is just a commodity that gets purchased. But if you make the employees shareholders, now all of a sudden they're brought into the partnership. And I think, and they aren't necessarily brought completely in, they may not own as much stock as the owners of the company, but if they own something, that diminishes the conflict of interest now. If employees don't get benefits and high wages, well, then at least they'll get benefits and high profits. And so it diminishes this conflict of interest that I've talked about before. The other thing it does is if it's taken seriously, if the employees actually own, I'm not saying they need to own a controlling share of the company, but if they own a significant share that they have to be listened to, it brings another voice into the corporate discussions about what's important for this firm. And it's a very interesting voice because, okay, first of all, it brings up employee interests, and they have some self-interests that are separate from those of the other shareholders or from management or whatever. But it also brings in a voice that has inside information on the company and also has a long-run interest in the firm, okay? And this is becoming more and more rare in our economies. In other words, if you try to compare who's going to be a better check on management and whether management is doing a good job, absent shareholders who don't know how the day-to-day running of the firm works, or employee shareholders who are there and can see what management's doing and have an interest in management making the right decisions. The other thing is that with this new technology, I mean, management has been turning over more quickly in firms, and shareholders change, with the push of a button on a computer. So now the ones that, it's not 100% true, but it's becoming more and more true that the firms that the interest in the firm that really has a long run interest in the firm is the employees, and they're mobile too. Believe me, employees are mobile. But if you're trying to compare these multiple interests, often they have the most long run interest. And certainly during the Great Recession, there was some criticism that American firms had adopted too much of a short-run interest, because the criticism was, and I think some of it was valid, perhaps not all of it, but the criticism was that management, because they get these incentives, stock incentives, were too focused on short-run stock blips up, and not focused enough on the long-term interests of the firm. And so the current system is arguably too focused on the short run, and that was argued with respect to the the leveraged the bonds, the mortgage bonds, things like that. The BP Horizon disaster, that it was argued that it was too much of a short run interest there. Even the stock buybacks that are continue to this day, the argument is those aren't necessarily in the long run interest of the firms. What they do is they jack up the stock price, and management gets its little payoff for the stock price going up. But what would, at least what they argue, is it would be better if management would actually invest in additional productive capacity or something, rather than buying up different companies or something. But so I think not only, okay, so back to your question about employee stock ownership. It not only decreases the conflict of interest among the parties, but it also brings in a voice that I think could be useful for the company, because they have inside information and they have a long-run interest in the firm. And actually, both of those things have been shown to be productive for firms. One argument why Ford is not doing so well now, but back in the Great Recession, they argued, why did Ford not need a bailout while GM and Chrysler did? And the argument was, at least, that Ford had the Ford company still involved. They had people with insider information and a long-run interest in the company who watched management and made sure management was doing a good job. I can't prove to you that that's true, but it was a good, plausible argument at the time. And you could make the same argument about at least responsible employees who had a say in running the firm.
Well, and kind of to your point of managers, catering to that quick gain. And you hear it all the time of, oh, this manager, CEO was brought in for 3 months or 3 years, and it didn't change fast enough, so they ousted him. And so it's kind of almost that, I don't know how broad that is, but the snips that you hear, that's kind of the culture is, we're bringing you in to make these changes, and long-term, sustainable, successful changes sometimes take time, and if they don't see that change fast enough, you're out.
Yeah. I mean, we talked a little bit about the Europeans sometimes arguing that they should adopt some of our flexible labor standards. You don't see them. I mean, I think European management is jealous of American management salaries, but they're not. But you don't hear them saying, "Oh, we need the American shareholder, share compensation schemes for management." I think they don't think that that's productive for companies in the long run, whether they're right or wrong about that.
Yeah. And kind of just to wrap up a little bit, I don't know if you can speak to this or not, but talking about the employee stock ownership component, how does like things like co-ops or some of those employee-owned businesses and such? I'm not super familiar with that model from a kind of a long-term perspective, and kind of what differentiates them from some of those other firms. Have we seen like an increase in that, a shift interest more towards some of that?
I see some academic interest in it. I mean, there have been co-ops in some certain situations have been very successful. I mean, they have Mondragon, which is this large co-op in Spain that's been operating for decades and has done a good job for its workers. I mean, I think that some of the potential, the difference between a co-op and employee stock ownership, I think, is the amount of the shares of the companies that the employees own. If they own the entire thing, then I guess it's a co-op. If they own a small portion of it, then it's employee stock ownership. And you could argue, I'm sure reasonable minds could think, maybe some employee ownership is good, but complete employee ownership may not be a good thing. I suppose it depends on what you worry, of course, about is employees just taking benefits for themselves and not paying shareholders. The market would regulate that to a certain extent. The company's not going to be able to borrow money if they don't actually pay a competitive rate of return on their capital. You can worry about certain kinds of employees, politically taking advantage of other kinds of employees or something like that within the voting of the company. We worry about minor shareholders at the expense being taken advantage of from major shareholders. So that happens at our current firms to a certain extent. It is, I mean, we've had co-ops that have been very successful in agricultural areas. We've had co-ops that have been successful in mining. I haven't seen a huge move for it. A couple of years ago, there was more talk about employee stock ownership, not so much talk about co-ops. And I haven't heard that much about it lately. Perhaps it's something that will be coming, though. I actually, on this point, I was at a conference on technology, and the question, we had a technologist there, very, very knowledgeable professor in technology, and the question was, what were employees going to be able to do in the future, and in order to protect their place in the economy? And his argument was they were going to have to become capitalists. They were going to have to save money up and put it in the stock market because capital was benefiting at the expense of labor from the technology, and that was the way they were going to preserve their place in the economy. Well, I suppose workers can do that on their own, but perhaps a firm, perhaps it would be valuable for a firm to do it through employee stock ownership. In other words, you come here, you don't own anything now, but the longer you stay here, the more productive you are, the larger your shares accumulate. We have a pension too, because we don't want you to just rely on one company for your pension, but this accumulates over the years. And then just like a partner in a firm, when you retire, you sell your shares back to the company that get distributed to somebody else within the firm. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. So I hope that there does come to be more interest in employee stock ownership in the future.
Oh, perfect. Well, again, thanks for sharing all that information. It was a pleasure to kind of chat with you and learn more about that relationship and kind of the difference between the U.S. and kind of abroad.
Glad to talk to you, Ryan. Anytime.
That's it for this edition of Cyber Focus. If you have any suggestions or questions for future topics, please let us know at cyber@indiana.edu.